Okay, good afternoon. This is Mike Conklin with Sentinels of Freedom, our podcast called Veterans Never Stop Serving. Today, our guest is Captain Jason Church, United States Army, retired, who I met back in, I think it was about 2012 or 2013 at Walter Reed Hospital. Got to know him. We offered him a scholarship, and he's never stopped climbing. And tremendous progress since then. And the best person to describe that is him, a little bit about his past, where he's going, doing some interesting things in politics. Married now, it wasn't when we first met him, and has a dog and a new house on the way, and just doing a lot of stuff. So this is kind of catch up for me too, is to see what he's doing. So Jason, kind of take over and give us a little bit about your background and the things I discussed earlier.
Well, first, thanks for having me on the podcast, Mike, and for everything Sentinels of Freedom has done for me and really every veteran that the organization has touched. I'm honored to be a member of the board of directors and continuing to give back to an organization that has given hope, inspiration, and quite frankly, the tools necessary to succeed in life. And I think that's really the bedrock and cornerstone of the organization that you founded. I am somebody who honestly thought the military would probably be a career for me. I saw my dad do that growing up. I was in fact born on a military base, Mike. I was born in Fort Knox, Kentucky. I saw my dad, and some of my earliest memories of life were actually my dad deploying to Saudi Arabia in the first Gulf War, pushing Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. My father served, obviously. He's 30 years combined reserve and active time. My uncle served a considerable amount of time himself, and both grandfathers have. And my younger brother's currently in Ranger Regiment. So it's a kind of a family affair over here. And it was something that I wanted to pursue. When I graduated from college in 2011, I commissioned a lieutenant. I was part of the ROTC program, and that began my military career. It was very fast, though. I went from being in class to being in Afghanistan in under a year. You want to pack in infantry officer training and ranger school and airborne school and all that in between, and then going over there was a lot. When I got to Afghanistan, I was put into a place that was one of the worst political climates in the country. In fact, if we look now at the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, a lot of it was originating in the areas that we were fighting. It was called the Horn of Panjwai, Kandahar, really tough place to operate in. The local population was quite frankly controlled, in my opinion, by the Taliban because they were willing to do a lot of just horrible things to persuade people. I don't even know if I want to use the word persuade, as much as it would probably just be coerce people into their methodology and their, well, let's just call it, quite frankly, barbaric methods of governance. And so it was a pretty tough fight. We were in an area where we've had a lot of killed in action, wounded in action, pretty consistent warfare. And for me, one of the hardest days was August 23rd of 2012. We were going to set up an outpost, predominantly to watch just enemy movement and trafficking. And as we were going on to the village, we had discovered really a daisy chain of IEDs. And that was the moment where I'm like, man, we got to get out of this situation fast. And I was trying to improvise, get my men to safety. And during the chaos of it all, an IED exploded and severed both of my legs below the knee instantly. I was bleeding out. I'd actually had even a hole in my arm really from the blast as well, but I didn't feel it because the pain was localized. So I'm trying to put a tourniquet on. The hand's not really working. And I actually told my medic to go and help the other men who were wounded. I quite frankly thought we were sitting in an ambush. But fortunately, I have some pretty great Americans surrounding me. who were able to push the enemy off and cordon the area and carry me to safety, get me to a medevac site, and lifted to Kandahar, where I was stabilized and brought back stateside. And that's actually where, after 20 surgeries and other various things, I met you, Mike, in the recovery rooms at Walter Reed. So it's quite a journey to get there. I tried to summarize that as best as I could there, though.
Yeah, that seems like yesterday. I remember, who was the other guy? I think he was a West Point guy that was kind of your buddy there. Was it Chin?
Well, there's Park.
Park.
Yeah.
Park. Yeah.
Park was another person in my unit.
Yeah. That was when Walter Reed was full. I mean, incoming daily. It was but any case, you got through that, and you did exactly what you told us you were going to do. You went off and got your law degree back there, and started working in various capacities in the political world, and are still in that world. And I think that's really what people want to hear, is how you've transitioned. You're onto a successful career, even though you went through a really tough situation, but you survived and motored forwards. That's just drive, motivation. That's you personally own that. We may have helped a little bit, but you had the drive and motivation that made it an easy deal.
I appreciate the compliment, but there is some truth, and it's not what you know, it's who you know. And one of the problems with any government bureaucracy you're dealing with, whether it's the military or just the civilian side of the government, is that it can be a labyrinth to navigate. There are benefits and there are things that are given to wounded service members, but attaining them and then being able to properly apply them are two different things. And oftentimes there are just needs that aren't seen by government. And I think organizations like Sentinels of Freedom understand that. And that's part of the reason why I had really a platform for success. Was I had, a few years there where I had no worries other than my educational pursuit. And granted, I was a single man at the time with no children and no spouse, but, it was still daunting with all the medical things I had to do, all the time and effort I had to spend on my rehab, that, for me, pursuing education was an outlet. It was an ability for me to say, okay, I'm still moving forward in my life. But those things cost money. and education isn't free, certainly when you're talking about postgraduate studies. The opportunities afforded by Sentinels of Freedom gave me that leg up, if you will, in some of these areas. So when I pursued my master's at Georgetown, Washington, D.C. is an expensive place to live. And being able to at least have a good chunk of that rent covered gave me so much relief in being able to just pursue my studies there, pursue working as a military fellow on Capitol Hill, pursue the things that I wanted to do that may not at the time have had any, pay for it. Right. I was able to do things and simply pursue my goals and dreams and not just try and make ends meet with a paycheck. When I graduated from Georgetown, I came back to Wisconsin. I'm a Wisconsin boy. I prefer being here in the North Woods than anywhere on the coast. Sorry, Mike. And coming back here, going to law school at this fine institution gave me not only the connections and wherewithal from the state, but also allowed me to get a license in, my home. To practice law. So after pursuing all of this and knocking all of that out, I still have a desire to give back to the country. It's why I've stayed involved in politics. And it's kind of what pushes me today to still pursue areas of academic or intellectual advancement. I still read pretty rigorously. My library has grown quite a bit, and I think it will until the day I'm no longer able to pick up a book and read it.
Yeah, I still do a lot of reading along these subjects. I love military history and current events, worldwide events, and of course, everything that's attached to our veteran and military communities. But we're probably a little bit different than a lot of people these days that don't read books at all. They look at the screen and they find what they want, little sound bites. But there's something to be said for just sitting down and totally focusing on a book and the words in the book. Even if I'm reading a book right now that's written by a pretty liberal guy. There's liberals, there's conservatives, whatever. This particular author is a little liberal, but it was his subject matter that intrigued me, and I'm reading through it, and you have to step back once in a while and say, okay, am I going to believe everything I read, or I'm going to take parts of what I read and say, this is true. This I'm a little skeptical about. I think that's the way you have to approach reading, unless it's scientific type, surveys. And
even if it's scientific, you should be questioning the foundation and the basis upon which they're making their claim.
It's there's knowns, like who was it, Rumsfeld? There's knowns, there's unknowns, and then there's unknown unknowns.
Right.
But I do see the kids. I have one granddaughter that reads avidly. But the other ones, no, they don't. They play video games and they watch TV and YouTube and all that stuff, which all their buddies do. So they're in the same boat. But I wish people would read more and take the time out of their week, just a week, just take a couple hours to run through a few chapters. But I was listening to somebody on the radio, and they said the next thing that's going to happen is holograms. In 10 years, we're going to all be, there won't be screens. We'll all be meeting in hologram situations, which is hard to believe, but I suppose
that would be
possible.
Cool.
Yeah.
It would be really cool. Yeah. When it comes to reading and all of these things, sometimes it's hard to really pin down, and because, for example, if I'm reading something that's historical old, look, I'm someone with 3 degrees, Mike, and I still need to look at a dictionary to understand some of the words that are used. So sometimes you're there's intimidation levels and factors. I've always been of a mindset that I like the fact that we live in a country that you can pursue whatever you'd like and get the just desserts of whatever that pursuit is. If your pursuit is playing video games and that's what you enjoy doing, if you're able to put food on the table and pay your rent or pay your mortgage or whatever, then by all means. I think that's one of the things that makes this country great. For me though, I guess I just am always searching for something more, or what else is out there, or what other, because I find it hard to believe that the life I have lived has not been experienced in some way, shape, or form by someone else in history.
Yeah.
So to not take the lessons learned, or to not try and see, how did they approach this problem, would be, to me, finding a stone that, boy, I would really have liked to have unturned, but just decided not to do it. And for me, reading and pursuing those things is
I'm reading a lot about our involvement in wars going back to the French and Indian Wars, and how we got from there to here, and the public involvement, public influence, all of that. It's pretty darn interesting, especially when you get through and past World War II to today, looking at the public's engagement or the public's knowledge of the commitment young men and women make joining the military, serving in the military, and then the long effects of wounds and injury, and how attached the World War II civilian population was, because we had 12 million people in uniform, almost every street, everybody. Yeah.
Well, and domestic habits changed. There was rationing. There was total changes on production lines in American companies to support the war effort. There there was, I don't think, a person who could say they didn't know someone who was a casualty of war.
Yeah.
And when you look at the most recent global war on terror, I mean, most of the civilian population could be detached. Other than 9/11,
Right.
there really wasn't much of a strain on the public. And if we're looking at rationing or war bonds, and I mean, we've just accumulated more debt to pay for the wars we've been fighting. We haven't exactly asked the population to initially pay for some of these things, at least in terms of cash and dollars. But when you're talking about people who've served, I mean, this is a war now that's spanned 20 years. So you have generations who have fought in it, and that changes a little bit of the civil military relationship. You know, Americans, we are pretty fortunate here, Mike, to live on what is basically a giant island. You know, the Canadians, I mean, hey, they like their hockey and maple syrup, but they're pretty good up there. They have a king still. You know, their head of state still the king of England, but they're good people. And obviously, we have the issues of Mexico and what's going on down there with the fentanyl and the drugs and the violence that's spilling on over there. When you compare that historically to other parts of the world where, you know, great power conflict or national conflict has been more common, we are quite fortunate to have a 2-ocean bordered country where we are smack dab in the middle of all commerce. I mean, we are truly the most blessed nation in the history of humanity. With that comes its pros and cons. Obviously, there's a ton of pros. We could talk about those all day. But one of the biggest cons is just sometimes the public's disregard, or sometimes what I consider to be open ignorance of human affairs, and how conflict in a lot of places really is just, you know, a trigger pull away. We're seeing that right now in Ukraine, and we're seeing that right now with the escalating tensions in Taiwan.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm writing a little paper for a high school class, history class. So I'm researching and come across that, you know, we have bases in 160 countries around the world. Almost 84% of all the countries in the world, we have some military presence. I think it quotes that China has maybe 2 or 3 bases around the world, and Russia, you know, about the same. So we've taken on the responsibility to be the protectors of the world. And you know, how long that will last, I don't know. But it's certainly an interesting era that's, I think, evolving right now with what's going on in Europe.
Most certainly with what happened in Ukraine has I think opened a few people's eyes that this idea of a new world order after the collapse of the Soviet Union really is a fantasy world. There are still authoritarian actors out there who have been able to control their respective political apparatus, whether it's Putin in Moscow and basically, I think, kleptocracy that is Russia, or what Xi Jinping has done, which is basically become the biggest cult of personality since Mao Zedong. You know, I mean, you now have authoritarian leaders who are sensing a moment of instability in world and global affairs. I mean, you know, it was quite evident that Putin was going to do something in Ukraine as he surrounded the nation for months before invading it. And NATO, which Ukraine is not a member of, but NATO has really, other than our spending and maybe Estonia and the Brits, has been below the 2% GDP threshold required of NATO members.
Right.
So, you know, you're showing a bit of what I would call some fat there that Putin was more than happy to take a chunk out of. I mean, Ukraine didn't have what we call the Article 5 commitment of other nations to come and defend it. It's not a NATO member. So going and invading that nation, I think, was something that I honestly think could have been prevented if the United States had shown, at least in Afghanistan, a little bit more planning, wherewithal, and understanding in our own withdrawal. But the fact that we did it in such a haphazard manner, I think, gave a green light to some of these players like Putin. When you look in China, which I think is even a more volatile situation because China is far more capable than Russia. You have a free and independent nation of Taiwan that has become democratic, that has developed a society that has espoused the same ideals that many of us in the West do. They've created technologies that I know you and I use every single day on our iPhones and when we look on our TVs. And there are people that are determined to have their own self-right of freedom. And, the Communist Party of China thinks that that is a problem. And I think that's a powder keg. I think it's a powder keg waiting to go off, especially if we're not working with allies in the area like Japan, who is the third largest economy in the world, by the way, and doesn't have an active military. I mean, we created it after the end of the Second World War. We restrained their ability to grow their military out. But I think it's time that they begin to act like the third largest economy in the world and put a military force that can blunt some of this stuff. Because I'll tell you, as someone who has been in war, you don't wish it upon anybody. I mean, you really don't. It is a terrible situation to be in. You don't want to. You want to avoid it if possible, but if needed, you want it done and quick. Yeah. You want to win it and be done. And right now, I think the current trajectory is showing some of the same signs that we saw just about 100 years ago, really during the Roaring 20s.
Yeah, it's getting more complex by the minute. I just hope somebody doesn't do something stupid that brings us to where we have troops in Ukraine. I know we've got several thousand in Poland and Czechoslovakia and the bloc countries, the bloc NATO countries. But you know how fast things can go off the rails. And one of them was Vietnam, before the Vietnam War, this incident called the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which really gave the government and the military the cue to start moving into Vietnam. And
Mike, one of my philosophies on some of this is I am all for spending a little bit of capital back here to decimate a military enemy like Russia. I mean, hey, if we're going to spend a little bit of money and they just want to keep destroying themselves, I'm all about it, because we don't have to send our own people over there. And hey, if you have a people like the Ukrainians who are self-determined, I mean, they do not want to be ruled by Moscow. That's a strong motivation. And I'm not saying we need to go there and do that ourselves, but my goodness, I mean, the funding to do that and repel those things, and that's a high return on investment.
It looks like, with the problems we had in Vietnam and in Afghanistan and Iraq, was the general populace was unwilling to fight.
100% correct.
For their freedom. They were clannish, tribal, all that stuff. Right. It appears that Ukraine, the people in Ukraine, are willing to fight for themselves. Now, how long they can hold out? I mean, their cities are being decimated. It's a largely agricultural country, but the key points, the key cities, I mean, they're just getting. It looks like World War II. It looks like.
One of the things that's very interesting about this, and this is, I think, the first modern war of the information era, or symmetric war of the information era. When we have our Patriot missile systems going over, I mean, these are anti-missile systems. They're meant to shoot down missiles, but you don't do that unless you have information and intelligence that allows you to pinpoint that. And I would say, arguably, one of the greatest American, really, assets that has been given to Ukraine hasn't been from our military. It's been from our private sector. It's been from Silicon Valley. I mean, Elon Musk's Starlink system allowed their people on the ground to get real-time information to be able to shoot these things down, because Musk has provided it for free and has given them the ability and the tools to use what's really a constellation of satellites revolving around the Earth at a lower orbit to pinpoint and shoot these things down. I mean, I find it appalling that our own Congress and that our own military apparatus isn't working more with the tech sectors in Silicon Valley and across the United States to implement some of these systems into a military grade type of equipment. I mean, Starlink is not military grade technology. It's civilian grade technology that they're using for military purposes. And the the biggest flaw I see right now in our own domestic governing system is that the members of Congress and the military establishment has not been as keen to implement these systems. And I think it's very important because real-time information on the ground is the hardest thing you can access as a platoon leader or as a company commander or anybody who is at that company grade level, because you're just revolving on orders from higher. And sometimes that information doesn't come as quickly as you want. But with that Starlink, you are seeing real-time decision making by ground level squad assets in Ukraine, and I think it's what's really hurt the Russians.
Yeah, we talked. Moving on a little bit, we talked earlier about current football playoffs and how I'm really happy with our San Francisco 49ers quarterback because he's a young guy. I think he's 22 or 23, but he carries himself with a lot more emotional maturity than most young men at that age. And I really like that. I look at Congress and go, we need more young guys in Congress. We got to start pushing some of these old white hairs like me out to get, some more relevant participation and have some more relevant effects of governance. You're one of those people that I certainly hope gets there at some point. I think we now have, I was reading something like we have 10 or 12 global war on terror members of Congress and Senate now, or veterans. Right. If you go back and look at that years past, there was a time after World War II where there was quite a number of veterans in Congress and Senate, and they were making a big part of making the rules of post-war reconstruction and our economy and helping the greatest generation move on to spur our economy. But it's tough with I grew up, we had 4 news channels or 4 channels on TV or no cable. And then you had, of course, newspapers. And that was it. That radio, that was it. And you really didn't sit by the radio all day and listen. You didn't read the paper all day, and you didn't watch TV all day. So there's, you went about your business. Now it's instantaneous news, 24/7, and you really have to be aware of the fact that you got to put some filters, your own personal filters, right, in place to say, am I going to really believe that? Let's, maybe I should check out the source, which is great because you can do that now so quickly. Right. We used to have to just go down to the library and pull books and books and books. Right. Now this huge information.
Well, Mike, there are pros and cons to the information age. I mean, one, like you just mentioned, the ability to research, unless you're talking about something really nitty gritty, you can do that pretty quickly. I think that one thing we are just beginning to understand is the impact of social media on just the human brain and the cognitive functions. I mean, I still remember growing up without the internet. I am old enough to remember, not being able to go on and look up whatever I wanted. I remember my mom yelling at me to go outside and play as a kid and not being able to take a cell phone to stay connected with her. I would just have to hear her voice when it was time to come back inside.
Right.
The world now, you've got different companies that have been able to create algorithms and programs that I think create addictive content. We didn't necessarily know what cigarettes or alcohol did when they first came out or when we first were able to mass produce them and get them to the public at large. And we're just now beginning to see what social media does. I mean, I think there's, I've been attacked publicly for saying this, but I have no problem with it. I think apps and things like TikTok, for example, are honestly a digital version of fentanyl. I mean, you've
Mhm.
got children and young people without fully developed frontal cortexes that are getting addicted to being on these scroll quick dopamine fix type of apps. And, I mean, obviously American regulators in our Congress and state governments can find ways of curtailing some of this, or making there be opt-in clauses, or making sure that there's parental sign off on being able to do all this stuff. But TikTok's not an American company. It's a Chinese company. It is basically controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And this is a type of government and type of, quite frankly, leadership that does whatever it can to weaken what it perceives to be as an enemy. And they perceive us in the West as enemies. And I don't think that they have any problem with exporting their drugs, whether it
Yeah.
be traditional drugs like fentanyl, which they are helping produce and help push through Mexico, or what I think is more in the digital realm, which is things like TikTok
Mhm.
and technologies that we know are causing harm in ways that we may not necessarily fully understand yet.
Yeah. Well, we go back to World War II and the control of and the propaganda of Nazi Germany. I mean, they were masters at it. One radio station, I think, or your radio had one station on it when Hitler was running that outfit. Yeah, there's so much complexity, and then you talk to people that just say, "I just want to live a simple life, pay my taxes, pay my mortgage, raise my kids," and you're bombarded daily by all this stuff. It's hard to get away from for the average person, even myself, who I consider being average. Um, I don't watch news all day because I'm busy here at the office. I'm doing research or whatever. But when I get home, I'm watching an hour and a half of news. And the various shows, and then I'll go to another. I'll watch some Fox, then I'll watch some CNN to kind of bounce that back and forth. Who's saying what? They do talk differently. They covered the big stories, but then there's other things that Fox doesn't cover that CNN does, and vice versa. And so I like to kind of look at that, but it takes amount of time, and when you're done, it's not as relaxing as sitting reading a book, or just talking with your spouse or your friends or whatever. So it does have I think there's a fatigue factor and this barrage of news. I mean, I'm sure you too. I get probably a couple hundred emails a day, most of them from organizations looking to do business with us or something like that. In fact, I'd say 90%, but you still have to go through them and say, okay, you can't put a spam filter on that knocks everybody out. And that's a time sink too. So there's a point where I think each of us has to decide what's important individually,
Right.
not to lock people out, but basically say, I've got a mission. This is what's important to me. The rest of it is just noise, and that takes a little discipline.
Yeah, well, and you've got to be able to set personal boundaries, I think, on a lot of this stuff, and that's a very difficult thing to do, especially now when, like you said, it almost feels like a bombardment of information.
Right, yeah. So tell me a little bit, if you can, because I know, and I'm fully expecting you to run again at some point for Congress, and I'm not going to say which party, but the good one. How's it looking for you in the future? And I know that's kind of your plan at this point. And
at this point, my biggest focus is really just making sure that my home is in good condition. Whether that's the physical structure or the emotional structure, and there will be a time to serve and give back, but that's the thing too. Being in Congress, being in any political office is supposed to be a service and sacrifice. And what that means is that you should have other things squared away before doing that. Otherwise,
I agree.
Rip you up. I will, when the time's right, I'll know. At this point, I think that there's a few things I can do really from my personal capacity that I think are helpful. I obviously still am involved with some of the stuff that's going on politically, and intend to stay that way. Having a personal public office, or a personal desire to serve in public office, isn't quite biting me, so hard at the moment, but at some point I would imagine it will again. The biggest thing for me right now is just making sure that I'm able to put the message I would like to out there, and be able to connect with those folks that can have a sway in this type of policy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's very much needed. We need some young blood and some innovation, and some people that think about, the country first, not themselves. And
Well,
and one of the,
Well, Mike, and there's many ways to do that, and I think you're a shining example of seeing a need and filling a void. With what Sentinels of Freedom has been able to do for so many injured veterans. The independence and understanding the value of oneself is something that is intrinsic, and you don't find that without help. You don't find that without others who tell you that there is a pathway. I have a way, I have a method, I can give you the support, I can do this to help give you a platform. And that doesn't happen without some sacrifice from your end. And I can't thank you all enough for the opportunities you've given me and countless other Sentinels through the years.
yeah, it's been quite a journey, as you know. I never thought I would be doing this. I thought we would just help one soldier from our town, and then it just kind of grew to the point where we were helping so many, became a full-time position. And where it goes in the future is interesting. We're in a period of time now where, as we discussed, the public is kind of anesthetized, thinks because the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq are over, that what's the need? And Gore Vidal, a famous author, writer, coined the term the United States of amnesia. And you think about that, how we go to war so quickly, and we try to forget war so quickly, but the results, the consequences of war, are that individuals come home who have sacrificed much by joining and serving, and those sacrifices don't just go away; they're a lifetime, physical and mental. And what I always say is that you all have earned the right placed to our nation's table of abundance and opportunity. And there's two ways that happens. One is governmental programs, services, etc., and then there's civilian, which we are part of. And that, I think, that's when I speak in meetings across the nation and presentations, I talk about that. Is there's a distinct governmental responsibility. VA programs, whatever, medical, everything. And then there's a civilian responsibility too, because we, in effect, elect the people that make the decisions in Congress, the Senate, and the presidency. They are our proxies. So we're directly linked. We give them the right to make decisions for us. And so we have responsibility. And not only that, it's the benefits that we enjoy, our freedoms that are guaranteed by people willing to volunteer and in the military and serve, and risk, a lot of risk. We're seeing some chinks in that armor with tough time getting people to join the military right now. All the recruiting commands are talking about it. How do we do this? How do we attract more young people to join, because our Army's down 20%. The same thing happened kind of after Vietnam also. Public kind of went to sleep. turned their back a little bit on the Vietnam veterans, a lot of them. They survived eventually, but it certainly wasn't easy for them. And I think that lesson is what we may have learned from the Vietnam era was we can't let that happen again. Now, how long can all of these groups exist? Do they have effective programs? I mean, that remains to be told. But overall, I'm pretty happy that there was a big void in public involvement. We all depended on, of course, the government, and then we depended on the Red Cross, USO, American Legion, all of them thinking that they had this all handled. It became apparent very quickly that no, they didn't. There was a need for more organization on the private sector because of the numbers, and that's how Wounded Warrior evolved, Tunnels for Tower, everybody else, including Sentinels of Freedom. Is if there wasn't a need, we wouldn't exist.
Right.
And so I'm very proud of our organization and several others, but I'm also I have to drop back and say I'm really proud of the people that support the mission, whether it's a corporation, a foundation, an individual. It's really been incredible to cross the country, see how different communities, totally different communities, have the same feeling of the need to support our veterans. So it's always a changing field, and the next step is, remember Don Rickles, a crazy comedian. He was doing a roast, and he pointed over to Bob Hope, who was on the dais, and he said, "There's Bob Hope. He's out looking for a new war." And it's the war. The wars come to us. We don't go out looking for war, but they seem to come, and you wonder what's the next one's going to look like, because it will happen. And I know for a fact how fast these hospitals can fill up.
Oh, yeah.
So we just have to be kind of diligent. And I think it's going to be guys like you who have been there, done that in the future that really continue to carry that message, So we're really proud of you, Jason, and really happy to see you moving on with your life and married. And, the first thing you do is you get a dog. Of course, you did that. Get a house.
With a wife. So
oh, did it? Okay. Well, we probably get another couple on.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, good to see you. I hope your parents and brothers are all doing. You got one down at Regiment, you said?
Yep. My youngest brother's in Ranger Regiment at Benning.
Is he at Regiment or 3rd Bat?
He's in 3rd Bat.
Oh, cool. All right. Good stuff. Well, he's with a great outfit, and we still visit down there. In any case, all right, buddy. Well, I hope to see you on my next trip out there, or one of my next trips out there, and catch up, and maybe in DC or something. I don't know if I'm going to get up to Wisconsin, but maybe it'd have to be summertime. The 1 month in the summer when you have good weather.
Come on.
I'm not used to the cold.
Yeah, it's all right. It's all right.
Yeah.
It's nice to have 4 seasons.
Yeah. Well, Jason, thank you again, and give my best to your wife and family, and let's continue to talk. Anytime you need us, you know where we are.
I know. Same to you and your family, Mike. Thanks again for everything you all have done.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening to our podcast, Veterans Never Stop Serving. I hope you'll share this podcast with your friends. It's always really a special time for me to talk to the Sentinels that we've worked with and watch their progress and how they've succeeded, gone through a tough situation and turned it around and really are leading very productive lives. And Jason, of course, is one of those. So until next time, thank you again for listening to Veterans Never Stop Serving. Have a great week. Take care.